Previously, the Beetle 68 crew retreated through a subspace suture, arriving at the MOMZ-14 cluster, a high-density, neon-drenched industrial megalopolis named Hub 09, managed by the arachnid-like KRR Vol. There, Ambassador Vol revealed a staggering truth. The crew are descendants of the first humanity, the Omeran, who 7,000 years ago edited their own genetic code to hide from a galaxy-consuming biological rot. By activating their advanced ship's core and using FTL technology, the crew has inadvertently turned up the volume, ending millennia of safety and signaling their location to an ancient hunger. Accompanied by their new 6 Arms alien guide, Ken, the crew must navigate this overwhelming alien hub to find a way to silence the signal before the rot follows them into the light. And now, let's continue our adventure. Ken guides us back to the upper sector areas, which are more fancy and specially made for luxury and client comfort. He leads us to a fancy trade zone, where hundreds of quarters are scattered around, designed for various species. In the newest quarter, we find the designated zone for the humans. The Solarinumeran quarter at Hub 09, Sector 7G, was a testament to the KRR TAC's terrifying efficiency. In the 4 months since leaving the Venus docks on Mission Day 58, the galaxy had felt like a cold, indifferent void. But here, the KRR TAC had carved out an entire section of the station based on the USF encyclopedia we had provided. As we walked, the cold, obsidian industrialism of the hub softened. The KRR TAC had used molecular fabricators to mimic Terran aesthetics with a precision that was almost unsettling. "Do you smell that?" Doc Silas asked, stopping dead in his tracks. He drew in a long, shaky breath, his eyes fluttering shut for a moment. That's petrichor, wet earth and nature. How the hell did they manage that in a space station 5,000 light years from Earth? Ken turned his upper pair of eyes toward the doctor, his voice a low, melodic hum. The encyclopedia provided chemical compositions for a pleasant atmosphere. My masters found the synthesis trivial, though the biological obsession with decaying organic matter remains a curiosity to the Lithesh. The architecture here was a hauntingly beautiful recreation of a world we hadn't seen in months. The walls were lined with holographic displays of rolling hills and blue skies, perfectly calibrated to match the light frequency of Sol. Beneath our boots, the deck plating was overlaid with a soft, reclaimed wood polymer that gave slightly under pressure, mimicking the forest floors of the Pacific Northwest. Every 20 meters, small recessed alcoves housed atmospheric scrubbers that didn't just clean the air, but infused it with the specific chemical signatures of Earth. The air was denser, scented with the synthetic smell of pine and rain, and the sharp KRR TAC angles had been smoothed into wood-grain polymers and brushed steel. Small robotic drones, shaped like hummingbirds, flitted between artificial planters filled with genetically synthesized lavender and jasmine, their wings emitting a low-frequency hum that helped stabilize human circadian rhythms. "It's too quiet," Lyra whispered, her hand never straying far from the grip of her pulse pistol. "Look at the lighting. It's perfect. Too perfect. It's like walking through a high-fidelity render of a history book." She kicked at a planter, the synthetic soil yielding with a realistic crunch. "They didn't build this for us to live in. They built it to study us." The most jarring change was the crowd. As we passed the buzzing insectoids and the gas tank dwellers, they didn't look away anymore. They stopped, bowing their heads or pressing limbs against their chests in palpable, heavy reverence. To them, we were the living ghosts of the first humanity, the legacy of the shepherd of the suture returned to the light. It was a bizarre juxtaposition, walking through a high-tech mall that looked like a boutique hotel in Neo-Tokyo, while being followed like celebrates by creatures that looked like nightmare fuel. "Sir, I think they think of us, more likely as the newest attraction on a space zoo," Lyra mutters, walking closer with the group, as one of the slithering alien tries to touch her hair. "It feels like we're the main attraction at the party." Kalen's voice crackled from the Beetle over our short-range comms. The KRR TAC are literally standing in a circle around the ship. They've set up a perimeter of glowing energy pylons, and the new shielding is dead quiet. But the vibe out here? It's heavy, Captain. I've got 3 different species of XENOs trying to leave offerings at the airlock. One of them just left a pile of glowing crystals that's throwing off enough radiation to give us all a tan. From the Umaran suite, looking out a massive glass crystal window that overlooked the docking ring, I watched the trade of Hub 09 continue. Yet our upgraded ship in berth 42 remained the center of the station's gravity. Let them stare, I muttered into the comms. If being the main attraction gets us the parts we need, I'll wear a crown. Just keep the sensors hot, Kalen. The great trial will convene when the final Hub representative arrives, Ken informed us, his 4 eyes fixed on me. Each eye moved independently, scanning the room for any potential threats or breaches in protocol. Until then, this sector is yours. We are waiting for a judgment you didn't know you were subject to. Several hours later, we were called to the High Spire, accompanied by Ken and Ambassador Valcor. The atmosphere was thick with a tension that made the air feel heavy, almost liquid. We were no longer in the comfort of the Umaran district. This was the court of the 14, a gargantuan amphitheater of obsidian and shifting light where the gravity had been adjusted to a punishing 1.1 G. It was a subtle KRR-TAC reminder of exactly who held the power in this system, a physical weight on our chests that mirrored the political pressure of the moment. As we stood on the central platform, the other 13 ambassadors arrived in a nightmare of biological diversity and cold, corporate calculation. There were the Cephar, spindly insectoids with carapaces etched in glowing stock market tickers, broadcasting high-frequency trade data that hummed in the back of my teeth. Beside them sat the Golvan, armored behemoths in gas-filled life support suits with voices like grinding stones, their breathing apparatuses hissing with every heavy movement. Finally, the Lectari drifted in, shimmering translucent beings like sentient nebulae, flickering in shades of gold and gray as they ran cost-benefit analyses on our existence. Their bodies pulsed with light every time a new data point was processed. They aren't looking at us as people, Lyra whispered, her hand hovering near her sidearm. They're looking at us as whether we are a new market or a liability. The trial was a blur of nonlinear arguments. Ambassador Valcor spoke with a passion that was a clear outlier, displaying the Nezimer core logs and the microscopic rot sample, pleading for a unified military front with a suture blockade. The rot does not respect borders, Valcor shouted, his voice echoing off the obsidian walls. It does not care for your quarterly margins or your trade routes. If we do not act now, the suture will consume the very markets you seek to protect. The response was a wall of icy indifference. The Cephar representative clicked its mandibles in a sound that translated to a dry, clinical dismissiveness. The data is anecdotal. The insectoid broadcasted, the words appearing on the light ribbons circling the chamber. Diverting military resources for a solar and ghost story would be catastrophic for the hub's logistics. We require more than the word of a primitive species to justify mobilization. The Golvan acknowledged our lineage and open trade channels, but flatly refused military intervention. To them, the Great Silence was a myth used to frighten young pilots. It was a slap in the face with a velvet glove. They granted us a seat at the table but locked the door to the armory. They're leaving us to drown in the dark, Doc Silas muttered as we filed out of the chamber, his shoulders slumped under the heavy gravity. As long as the credits flow, they don't care if the galaxy burns at the edges. I've seen this before in the pharma wars back home, but on a scale this big, it's nauseating. Valcor stood beside us, his jewels dim in a gesture of deep mourning. He apologized, noting that only 3 of the 14 stood with him. The others were blinded by the brilliance of their own hubs. However, there was a small silver lining. The Council cleared technical upgrades for the BEETLE 68. We now possessed obsidian sheath shielding integrated into our Osiris 7 core, making us nearly invisible to the rot's thermal detection, and a USFKRR TAC trade uplink for a high-bandwidth tight beam back to Earth. We have a place here, I said to the crew, trying to find the steel in my voice. We have the tech, we have the trade. But we're on our own, with no foreseeable way to return home, while I look out the glass view looking down at the prowling metropolis of Hub 09. That's the great space irony, Cap. Silas mutters. As we walked back, Ken whispered that Valcor had authorized a private, Black Ops mission to a nearby, unmapped suture gate. In his private sanctum, Valcor looked older, warning us that the 14 would soon seize his assets for gross negligence. Before they could, he handed Kalen a glowing data shard, upgrading our USF fabricator to print KRR TAC-grade components and installing a military-grade pale blue force field shielding. "I cannot give you weapons," Valkor whispered, his voice heavy with regret. "To do so would be an act of war against the Council. But I can give you the means to survive, and I can give you Ken. He is of the Lithesh, a people who see the cracks in the universe that the KRR TAC ignore." Ken bowed, his 6 arms crossing over his chest in a complex gesture of loyalty. "I know the Meccan pirates and the debris of the asteroid belt better than any soldier," he promised. "I will guide the Beetle through the gaps where the fat hunters cannot follow." "You're coming with us?" Lyra asked, her eyes narrowing. "I have no place left here if Valkor falls," Ken said solemnly. "Your ship is my home if you accept me." "Well, hop aboard, alien guy," Kalen retorted excitedly, already clutching the data shard as if it were the Holy Grail. "But if you touch my soldering station, we're going to have words." We headed back to the Beetle 68, the crew silent as we processed the addition of a 6-armed alien to our mess table. The transition to the docking bay was quiet. Ken didn't head for the upper crew bunks. He descended into the lower storage bay, his 4-armed silhouette casting long shadows against the reinforced hull. "The upper floors, they are too thin, too cold," he noted, his elven ears twitching at the sound of the life support fans. "The vibration of the core is more comforting here. It feels like the pulse of a living thing." As a cold-blooded species, the warmth from the Osiris 7 core was a biological sanctuary for him. Kalen emerged from the fabricator holding a freshly polished Beetle 01 insignia and his own crew card. "Your crew now," Kalen said with rare sincerity, handing the card to Ken. "In this ship, everyone is equal. No tiers, no corporate lineage. You pull your weight, you get your share of the rations." Ken froze, his 4 eyes blinking in a stunned, unsynchronized rhythm. "I have no lineage to offer in return," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "I am merely a servant of a fallen ambassador." "Good," Kalen smirked, clapping the alien on his upper right shoulder. "Lineage is just paperwork that gets in the way of good engineering. Help me figure out this 0.5% power drag in the shielding manifold, and we'll call it even." Inside the cockpit, the air smelled of synthetic pine and rain, a lingering reminder of the quarter we had just left. As we cleared the gantry, the magnetic soles of my boots clanked against the Beetle's new obsidian skin, which seemed to swallow the light of the station. "Clear for orbit," I commanded. The Beetle 68 detached with a silent hiss, vanishing into the dark, leaving the false comfort of Hub 09 behind for the reality of the void. For 3 days, we picked our way through the asteroid belt until a sudden flash of red strobed across the fleet tactical overlay. "Contact! 3 bogies coming out of the sun," Lyra barked, her voice carrying the sharp, lethal edge of a Martian fighter vet who had lived through the worst of the Belt Wars. 3 retrofitted spaceships, scavengers with rusted hulls and overpowered engines, dropped from the shadow of a silicate cluster like starving wolves. "Ambush," Lyra barked, pulling the ship into a sharp roll that sent the loose tools in the engineering bay flying. I slammed into the tandem gunner's seat right beside her, the targeting reticle blooming to life as the HUD adjusted to the high-speed engagement. As the commander and weapons sexpert, I could feel the Beetle 68 humming beneath me, waiting for the word to unleash hell. "Shockin'," Ken's voice crackled from the bay over the internal comms, his tone urgent as he moved with the fluid grace of a Lithesh. "Bottom feeders. 2 of them are mounting large kinetic slug cannons and magnetic harpoons. Watch for those small PCD turrets. But that 3rd one, she's a bulky beast. It's got a massive cannon that'll devastate us if we take a hard hit." Directly behind me, Kalen's fingers flew over the panel, managing the ammo feed and power supply, while Ken used all 6 of his arms to assist him, hauling heavy munitions and recalibrating the human-made fabricator with the expertise of a master technician. "Keep the power steady, Kale. Ken, get the rail guns ready," I shouted over the whine of the charging capacitors. Beside them, Doc Silas gripped the auxiliary navigation screen, his eyes darting across the vital signs of the Beetle systems. "I'm not a combat pilot, Captain," But I'm monitoring the modules and keeping our pitch stable. Silas yelled, his face pale but his hands steady. Targeting one locked. I yelled. A massive kinetic slug from the first scavenger splashed against our shielding, rippling the surface like a stone in a pond. Shielding capacity at 88.68%. Doc, Silas called out, his voice tight as he tracked the power dissipation from the Corval tech. My turn, I muttered, the world narrowing down to the red diamond of the first slug thrower. The ship shuddered as I unleashed the two frontal side pulse cannons. The concentrated energy punched through the lead shock and sensors, while I used the two frontal tip laser pointers to paint their reactor. Vents. Atmosphere vented in a frozen white cloud of debris. One down. Don't let the others flank us. The second shocking ship, seeing its comrade crippled, attempted a desperate maneuver to bring its magnetic harpoons to bear, its thrusters glowing a bright, angry orange. He's trying to snag the hull and drag us into his PCD range, Lyra warned, her Martian reflexes kicking in as she yanked the Beetle into a punishing bank. Another heavy slug slammed into our side, making the internal lights flicker. Shields are taking the brunt. We're down to 74.42%. Silas reported, his fingers flying over the module health readouts. I slammed the trigger of the dorsal pulse cannon. A massive bolt of concentrated energy punched straight through the pirate's superstructure and exited the stern, leaving the ship drifting and powerless. The third ship, the bulky one, finally managed to align its devastating large cannon. A massive projectile streaked through the void, catching us on the dorsal plate. The impact was a physical wallop that threw us against our harnesses, the sound of protesting metal echoing through the bay. Direct hit from the large cannon. Shielding is dropping fast, 60.12%. Doc, Silas screamed over the alarms. Beetle, 68 can handle it. Silas, just keep those modules green. I roared back. The bulky scavenger, seeing that we were still upright and charging after a hit that should have vaporized a USF frigate, finally lost its nerve. Its sublight thrusters flared in a max burn retreat. He's running. Kalen cheered from the weapons bay. Let him go. Lyra growled that it wasn't happening. She brought us alongside the runner with terrifying precision, her experience as a vet showing in every micro-adjustment. Nobody tells the hub where we are, she said coldly. At her command, Kalen slammed the override for the ER burst while I swung the ship's tail around. I thumbed the triggers for the two large backside rail guns, the recoil rattling my very bones. I used the frontal tip laser pointers to guide the shots, disabling their thruster manifold and turning their propulsion into useless scrap before their big gun could cycle again. The victory was swift, but as the adrenaline faded, my mind drifted back to the Solarinumeran quarter. Even out here in the debris-choked belt, I could still feel the synthetic humidity on my skin. The KRR TAC had gone to such lengths to mimic a home we could barely remember, using the shielding and resources provided by the Ambassador Corval, Kin's old master. I thought about the way the light hit the brushed steel in those hallways, designed to look like a sunset over the Mediterranean. It was a golden cage, a beautiful lie crafted by a species that viewed us as a museum exhibit rather than an ally. Captain, shields are recharging. We're back to 95%, Kalen reported, his voice dropping back to its usual confident drawl. That Corval shielding is the real deal, Doc, Silas added, wiping sweat from his brow as the alarms finally silenced. If we'd had the old USF plating, those rockets and that bulky cannon would have peeled us like a grape. Kin chittered in agreement, his 6 arms already moving in a blur as he worked the fabricator to prep for the long journey ahead. The void went silent, save for the rhythmic thrum of our own core. Kin's voice cut through the comms from the warm shadows of the lower bay. He had already patched into their emergency frequency, his 4 eyes fixed on the deciphered data stream as he sent an ultimatum in the Meccan dialect. The translation scrolled across our HUD, warning the scavengers to lower their seals and surrender to the Solaran or die in vain. While the pirates chewed on that, I unbuckled from the gunner's seat and signaled for Doc and Kalen to follow me for heavy prep. We headed aft, the Beetle 01 insignias on our gear catching the red combat lighting of the corridor. In the weapons bay, we checked the seals on our atmospheric suits and primed the breaching charges. We had come billions of light years from Venus, and we weren't letting a few bottom feeders stand between us and the first humanity's gate. Lyra brought the BEETLE 68 in with the surgical precision of a clockmaker. The magnetic grapples on our belly let out a heavy, metallic clack as they locked onto the pirate's scarred hull, aligning our airlock perfectly. Lyra's voice echoed through our internal comms, informing us she was staying at the helm to keep the shields polarized and would give any intruders a welcome of our pulse cannon and railguns if they showed up. In the airlock, the atmosphere was thick with ozone and adrenaline. I checked my coil gun's charge while Doc Silas tapped a fresh stim pack into his combat rig. Ken stood between us, looking less like a guide and more like a predator. His forearms were each occupied, 2 gripping KRR tac shock staves, one hovering over his tactical belt, and the last braced against the bulkhead. I asked if they were ready, and Doc gave a curt nod before I slapped the C4 charge onto the pirate's outer seal. The breach was a deafening crack of expanding gases and shrieking metal. As the pirate ship's internal oxygen screamed out into the vacuum of the docking collar, we surged through the smoke. The ship was a claustrophobic nightmare of exposed conduits and rusted plating, smelling of the stale, metallic air of a desperate crew. This was a vessel built from scrap, and Ken was a blur of motion within it. He moved through the zero-G environment with a grace we couldn't match, using his 4 limbs to propel himself off the walls. He caught the first pirate mid-lunge, pinning its primary thorax to the wall with one hand while the other 3 kept the corridor suppressed. Ken bellowed at them to face their air, his voice dropping into the terrifyingly precise register of high Ken. Doc Silas dropped a second scavenger with a non-lethal stun burst, and within 90 seconds, the bridge was ours. 3 pirates groaned on the deck, their pirate gear sparking as they tried to draw breath in the thinning atmosphere. Ken didn't waste time, grabbing the leader by the throat and lifting him until their eyes were inches apart as Ken widened his grin, showing his sharp teeth through the plated armored visors. The pirate leader wheezed that there was nothing, but Ken slammed him back into the command console, the metal buckling as he demanded to know if the small person was lying to him. The pirate's eyes widened as he recognized the High Lythesh dialect, the language of the masters they tried to steal from. He realized he was dealing with the grip of the ancient lineage and stammered out a navigation point for 9-2. Ken dropped him like trash and turned to me. He explained that the gate isn't an object, but a gravitational anomaly at coordinates 492. The Meccan call it the Pioca, or Thirsty Rock, because ships that go too close never come out, using it as a dumping ground for things they want the void to claim. We headed back to the BEETLE 68 as the pirate ship began to drift. Doc Silas checked our vitals while Kalen waited in the storage bay to spool up the Osiris core. I noted that if the KRR TAC fleets couldn't navigate it, we would be flying blind into a gravitational whirlpool. Ken settled back into his warm corner, his forearms finally relaxing, and assured me we wouldn't be blind because we had the echo of the first humanity. Ken provided swift justice back on the pirate vessel, a grim necessity I hadn't initially pushed for. I'd mentioned the possibility of taking them as prisoners, but Ken had been blunt. "Brave captain, there is no mercy with these pirates. They wouldn't give you the luxury," he had said, his 4 eyes blinking in a hard, rhythmic sequence. "Even if you took them back to the hub's trading zone, they'd instantly be shot and hung from the outer rings as examples. They know the price, yet they choose the life because this side of the graveyard is unregulated. It's a grim business, but Ken isn't wrong. Out here in the black, mercy is a currency nobody carries. Taking those Shaken back to the Marlkith would just be a slower way to end them, dangled from the station as a warning to the next lot of scavengers. Out here, you're either the hammer or the anvil."